going to take a comfortable position from the beginning here while I welcome our guests. It's my pleasure to be with you today and to introduce you to a little bit of the work that we do in the Turing Institute in terms of economic analysis and policy making. So a lot of the work that we do is not just on fundamental analysis, fundamental science and economics, but also we try to translate a lot of this research into policy outcomes. And it happens that the Department for Business and Trade is one of our now, for a few years, good collaborator and partner to different projects. So I'm very, very happy today to have this session precisely with one member from the Department for Business and Trade and one from the Turing who will tell you a little bit about this project that they are developing on the big problem, the puzzle of productivity. So first, from the Department of Business and Trade, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Vrusina Wajos. And she's a data science team leader in DBT. She's an expert in NLP, natural language processing, in machine learning and complex systems. And she's interested in improving policymaking through gathering insights from previously unexploited data sources. And her current work focuses on the effective use of data and management information to provide a bigger picture and context for business and trade-related decisions. She has a keen interest in translating data and modeling and their limitations into policy impacts. And before joining the civil service, she completed her PhD in theoretical physics at University College London. So thanks for being with us, Vrusina. And second, we have Zachary Kessler. So please, Zach, come on board. And Zach is a UKRI Policy Fellow with the Department of Business and Trade, excuse me, and a Research Associate at Alan Turing Institute. Before joining us, he completed his PhD in economics at George Mason University in the United States, and his research predominantly focuses on creating micro-level simulations of labor sorting processes, as well as adding depth and nuance to models of skill and occupations. So welcome, Zach. Thanks for being with us. And please, the floor is yours. And after your presentation, we will have some Q&A.
Absolutely. So thank you all for joining us immediately after lunch. We're so happy to have you here today. As Omar stated, this project is sort of a continuation of some of my work in my PhD program, but also was really intimately developed with an eye towards policy and what would be needed to make a useful tool to resolve such a major issue like the productivity puzzle in the United Kingdom. If you're unfamiliar, the productivity puzzle is related to this concept that productivity growth in the United Kingdom has slowed down following the Great Recession, and we've sort of struggled to understand what the root cause of that is, as well as try to find and innovate solutions to understand that. This project is focused really in particular on combating labor productivity in a lack of labor productivity growth, from the perspective that skills are fundamentally going to be an influence on the technology that your society can generate. In many respects, sort of the occupations that are present really do drive what firms are capable of, firms just being a stand-in for business here. But the particular problem that this is addressing is through this concept of sorting. And sorting is simply a reference to the idea that there are workers of sort of particular types that will end up in different places in the economy. And we think about this really in three core questions. So the first is this idea of proper positioning. When we talk about proper positioning, what we really mean is, are the occupations that are most critical, those occupations which contribute the most innovation, which drive forward the frontier of technology, does our economy have those workers in a sufficient way? Within those critical occupations, those critical positions, we think about proper proficiency. Are our educational institutions, our professional training institutions, helping those workers in those positions achieve the necessary skill sets and competencies to execute on those in such a way that they're able to do what we want them to do. And then lastly, this concept of proper placement. And this is sort of the keystone bit that's especially relevant for labor productivity. It's, are those workers coming together alongside great coworkers in good businesses that can drive forward and innovate in the way we want them to? This new framework that our model is sort of contributing to and assisting and developed in part with DBT is focused on kind of three main components. What we talk about is an endogenous sorting process. And really what we mean by that is we want to allow individual workers within this computational model to evaluate alternatives and make decisions surrounding where their skills are going to be best suited. This then, from that process, is going to drive a sort of emergent technology scene. What we mean by that is, as workers are moving in the economy, firms are going to be making decisions regarding what types of technology they want to invest in. And we can see that and generate that through the data itself. And then from there, because this is a computational model, we can do all kinds of interesting experiments and scenario situations and design those with an idea that we can then use this as a testing ground for policy. So we are the research stage, so I'm not going to let you get out of here without looking at an equation. This maybe scary equation simply conveys a basic idea that every worker is going to have that occupation point. We call this a specialization. And they'll have this point of proficiency, this ability term. In the literature, you'll often see it referred to as a sort of quality score or a level of execution. But this equation is sort of the way firms are going to operate. And the core idea here is just this idea that firms desperately want to expand their capabilities. They want to employ new and innovative occupations within their businesses. And that's our diversity term. But at the same time, businesses also then, as they expand their capabilities and the number of people they contain, it becomes harder and harder to coordinate all of those different responsibilities and get them on the same page. So these competing forces are going to shape how businesses are evaluating what workers they want to employ, as well as what workers will want to join those particular businesses. Now, the results I'm going to show you today are from a US version of the model, but the reason I wanted to go through some of this data is because the magnitude and scope of what we're building is meant to be a full one-to-one simulation of the labor market. So there are some 140 million agents in the data above. We have, for every instance of an agent, every manager, every engineer, every teacher, we have one of those workers of that occupation in our model. And we're trying to build out this full-scale operation. So what are some of the key results? When you estimate that ability level, what you can get are these very nice, clean distributions of proficiency at the occupational level. So in the US, there are 22 major occupational groups. We can see clear heterogeneity in this chart for different occupations. And the distribution in an individual occupation pertains to the variance within that occupation across the US. So I can go in and see, for example, in computer and mathematical occupations, group 15, we see a relatively tight distribution of ability. What that means is I can go in and I can see a computer programmer in California versus a computer programmer in Nebraska versus a computer programmer in Ohio, and see precisely what their contribution is and where they stand relative to their compatriots. This is especially useful because we can then, once we have these skills, generate the technologies that firms end up employing. What we have here are two charts. On the left-hand side, we have the color is set by the diversity of that firm. So you can think of that as the raw capabilities, how diverse their production process ends up being. On the right, we have what we call their technology term. This is sort of the secondary component that they have to balance. They need these capabilities, but to do that requires technology. And what we see, again, these are purely emergent. We don't set these up front. These fall out of how the data speak to us and speak to the model. And we get these very clear emergent technology types, which are critical for shaping productivity. What we then look into is how these particular technology types generate complementarities. So we can determine what occupations are critical for enhancing the capabilities of their coworkers. So some occupations, we have this, what we call a complementarity wage premium in the data, or in the model. And basically what that stands for is this idea that not only when you join a business do you contribute your own skills and abilities, but that contribution can successfully augment your coworkers. We've all been in good teams, obviously. I'm privileged to be in a good team with the Alan Turing Institute and as well as with DBT. But there are also people who unfortunately end up in teams that maybe aren't so cohesive and struggle, and that has real impact on the productivity of these workers. So the gain of this model is to fundamentally attribute to each of the three components that drive productivity: individual worker skills, firm technology, and the quality of the teams that these workers are situated within. And you can get access to all of that information at the occupational level, at the regional level, the aggregate, if that's where you want to sort of analyze. And you can do this in a way with such a high degree of nuance that's just not possible in other methodologies. So what are some use cases? This is a computational model. It's a simulation. Once it is calibrated, you have the capability to conduct several types of scenario tests. We've done things where you focus on upskilling and a general upskilling of workers. You can see if that upskilling is useful in specific regions versus others. You can see how if you intervene on the firm business side, if you intervene on the worker side, how both of those are relevant. And you really have a holistic set of tools there that you can now operate with. We also could use this to establish what are the minimum skill levels we need for an occupation to be a sort of contributing asset to a business. And also for that worker to be able to capture on the human capital investment, their skill sets, such that they can be competitive in the workplace. So they have a good job lining up. They're not just going to school and sort of arriving at a dead end. We want both of those possibilities to be available to us. And then lastly, we have the opportunity to really understand where value is added when you engage in sort of regionally specific place-based policies. This is a major component that the UK is interested in. Or if perhaps our focus needs to be on more centralized and coordinated policies at the national level. And you can conduct these experiments at both levels interchangeably at the same time, in a staggered capacity, whatever you particularly want to focus on. And so with that, we design this full playground that has the capability to enhance our understanding of productivity with an output-minded focus that the end goal of this project is not just academic contributions, but also implementations in the policymaking process and how we can try and improve and innovate on that area. So with that, I'll turn it over to Frazina.
Thank you so much, Zach. So basically, I'm here to talk about how this work will slot into policymaking. And sitting through a couple of panels earlier, I realized that it's much easier to understand how data science feeds into operational solutions, because it's so easy to see. It's just like, okay, the service that I'm getting from gov.uk have improved. But policymaking sometimes can be a little bit scary, because it's like, oh, are we going to have automated decision making, especially when you mention labor sorting? It's just like, what kind of planned economy we are planning here? But it's not, that's not, the way to look at it is to see the type of layering that the government has when it comes to data science solutions, that the operational models are there to fix a problem that's impacting everyone and the individual users. And above that, we have policy teams who have their own policy levers, which are very important for them. But as Zach has alluded to it, education is there for education. Work and pension is there for work and pension, and we are there for business and trade. And as much as we want full integration across all the platforms, it's not possible. But there are certain projects that are sitting above that they have to take into account all this. And then we could sit there in central analysis teams, and I'm in a very lucky position in the Department for Business and Trade that we have that type of central economic future planning team that cares about this and is allocated to it. But we do not necessarily just want to sit there with an empty Jupyter notebook and say, okay, labor sorting, let's start now, because there's an academic involvement. And I'm talking as if I was an expert in this, but actually I'm a beneficiary of a project that has been started by Bayes before the machinery of government started. And we can already see that even from when we are in-housing the solutions and we are trying to create those caveats around the model outputs, we can see that it can sit as a central model that can feed into several policy teams, and our internal data science team is there, luckily, to be able to interpret the results and help them see what are the questions that they can ask to interrogate this model, which is extremely useful. Also, thank you, UKRI, for paying your salary. Which is the long-term decision-making comes into place that can come from these academic relationships.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it from me.
Great stuff.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. And obviously, this is something that really I feel passionate about, and I could ask you a lot of questions, but I will let our audience, so I want to open the floor to questions from the audience. We will also be using Slido, and I will try to alternate. But in the meantime, please, anyone who has a question for our speakers, please raise your hand, and we will take the microphone to you. And if you are shy at the moment, then I can start with, I see a question there. Yes, please, the gentleman there in the middle of the aisle. Yes, it's a long distance to cover, but yeah, thank you.
So by introduction, I'm Ken. I'm a senior data scientist at NHS England. My question concerns about the external, how you incorporate external factors. For example, unions, industrial actions, and whether or not there's a question about productivity versus remuneration. I thought, would the model have access to that kind of information?
So you could certainly implement it. Obviously, this is for a US context at its outset, but as we're transitioning into a UK prototyping and building out those systems, that is a component that we're looking at. You can implement it in a few ways. We've looked at a couple test cases of how it adjusts different things like wage relationships between occupations, how it could impact sort of firm behavior, what information both parties have when they're in a bargain, or a negotiation rather. So there are certainly some instances where we're building out those systems. But again, one of the benefits of the model is its capability to, and it was designed this way, to be a highly flexible kind of core that you could attach things to. So like a more robust market power component. We've had talks about potentially looking at social networks amongst workers. What does that do? These are areas that could be appended to the model that might not necessarily be in it currently, but because of the flexibility of the framework, and given we wanted to be policy focused from the outset, we were able to make that happen.
I suppose this question is broader, not just about this model, right? Modeling in general. Do you have any thoughts along these lines of incorporating external factors in models?
So we started to do that with models that we are looking at. There are also agent-based models. We have a new flavor in the team now, which looks at kind of having a core model that we know is sufficiently quality assured for its core purposes, but we know because each team has a different policy interest, we are already looking at how those core models could be modified to answer a certain policy question. And then when we look at the outputs, they will be calibrated for that policy questions. I mean, as Zach alluded to, I think the quality assurance of agent-based models is not as straightforward as the regular bulk standard data science product, where you're just like, you had your training set, your validation set, and your test set, because it requires insight. And we have to have a more integrated relationship with the policy teams in order to evaluate whether the outcomes are making sense. So there's a lot of like kind of back and forth and user engagement rather than just like, this is the model, this is what the model said, take it.
Thank you, great. I think we have time for one more question, and I will bring it from Slido, which I think touches on your comment, Regina. And I want, I think, the policy perspective and the modeling perspective. So it's, what does the value of complementarity wage premium imply? For example, it seems hard imagining healthcare working without support staff, even if they are not valuable.
All right, go first.
I mean, this is never there to like kind of replace policymaking. Policymaking is extremely complicated, where data science models can give you a point of view, and these sometimes governments are accused that they are, and I'm an analyst and I love numbers, sometimes governments are accused that quantitative models are seen as superior to qualitative models, but it's not the case, because there are a lot of qualitative factors that are taken into account. And as much as generative AIs could take care of like kind of reading text and making evaluations on that, they're not going to replace that type of policy making. What we want to see is that if we had 4 factors or 5 factors on which policy was based on, at the 6th and 7th that are based on these new insight models. I hope this answers the question.
Yeah, I think it's, within the model, we're super conscious of how different types of workers just meaning workers of various occupations, are interacting with one another. So obviously, to the example of the question asker with respect to support staff for any type of the medical professions, one of the benefits of complementarity is that it is a coexistence. It's both factors being relevant. One of the fun insights of the model is that managers end up being highly complementary in nature. Right? That is their role to a large extent, is to coordinate people and make sure where certain end objectives are being met. But obviously a manager is also going to be evaluated by their workers, and their workers are critical and in determining what they themselves as a manager within their role can be successful as. So both factors have to be accounted for, and the model is picking up that sort of nuanced relationship between both components as it operates and calibrates. So I think we're conscious when we're outlining complementarity that the source is both of the items together simultaneously, not just one or the other.
Great, thanks a lot. And I think we have now reached the end of the session. Before asking you to join me in a round of applause for our speakers, I want just to invite you to chat with Zach and Regina either after the session, or you can go to the 5th floor to the stand 29 on the group called Modeling for Policy, where you will learn more about Zach's work and other members of the team. So thanks again, both of you.